We are kicking off today's session, and the topic is very interesting. It starts with new tariffs for sheriffs in today's training. As you all know, that the new tariffs were published in the Government Gazette and became effective on the 11th of September 2020. And we still notice that some sheriffs are still struggling with how to start billing, and there are some new nuances of how we should be treating certain charges in our offices. And you know, without you billing properly in your system, you will not make money. And so the cycle will go on and on. So we thought this is very important. So we must make it as interactive as possible. And then, of course, we've got the next training session, which is on the 27th of November, which is about sheriff's software programs. We've got various software programs that many offices are using, but ultimately, I think the baseline is about what is important for you to be able to capture in those systems to assist you for accountability and to assist you to be able to have the BI reports. And why these reports, business management, because many of us don't see these offices of ours as a business unit that should become profitable and should be able to sustain your offices. And then the third session is actually scheduled on the 25th of January, which is about debt collection. We thought this was a very important topic because, you know, in this difficult time during the economy, a lot of people don't understand how important it is to put emphasis on debt management and to ensure that they collect these debts. Otherwise, the cash management cycle becomes affected and negatively impacts on your own cash flows in your offices. And of course, the last one is, which is very interesting that we chose in February, is maximizing your income in your offices. A lot of us don't even know how to maximize this income, and we thought it is very important, and it would be great to hear from you. And we will in today's session be also presenting a section on one way of how to appropriate travel costs in line with Table C, Part 2 of the Magistrates Court Act and Rule 68 of the High Court Act, as this is ongoing queries from various stakeholders. In fact, one of the points that we would like to deal with is, and I think Mr. Morgan is going to deal with, is about how do you specifically handle certain billing processes from magistrates and also officers, and also from an RAF perspective, and where there's a de-link between these our offices and the various authorities. I'd like to wish us a very productive morning today. Please make it as interactive, and I hope we find this very valuable. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Vincent and the training division within the board, and also to thank you, Ellen, for the efforts of work that you have done in collating this today's and the various other modules. I really appreciate that, Ellen, and I think you deserve a round of applause, because this is not somewhere where we can buy these modules off the shelf. We rely on individuals like the Morgans and many others to assist us collate the documentation to be able to bring something of value to our offices. With this being said, I really appreciate you taking the time. I see we've hit the 51 mark participants, and I think it's also being streamed in some other offices on a more broader perspective. On this being said, thank you very much for joining us, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the introduction. Colleagues, welcome. Welcome to the session. As Chair mentioned earlier on, it's going to be a series of training sessions on specifically fees and how to charge various fees in line with the Gazette. As the Chair mentioned earlier on, it's the Gazette we're referring to, that was Gazette number 43592. And what we want to do is firstly go through the traveling and how to apportion traveling. At the board, we found that sheriffs are constantly being taken for taxations and reported to the board for overcharging on the traveling fees. So we thought let's in the absence of a proper structured formula in the tariffs in both Magistrates Court and the High Court tariff, we thought let's put something together that would assist sheriffs. Now, we are well aware that throughout the country, sheriffs have applied different formulas that worked in their offices to proportion the traveling. We investigated a range of possibilities in order to assist sheriffs so as to avoid taxation and also to be fair in charging your traveling cost. As you know, in the recent times, or in the past rather, the Magistrates Court tariff especially did not have traveling charges from the first kilometer you traveled. Traveling cost started over the 12 to 20 kilometer radius. Now, with the introduction of traveling cost per kilometer traveled from the sheriff's office or the office of the magistrate's court, whichever is closer to the service address, it created a fuss in the legal profession in the sense that now the bills have increased dramatically, and obviously the fees have gone up for sheriffs. And obviously, board being the regulator had to find a way to assist sheriffs in charging or portioning these fees correctly. I'm going to, for the purpose of this exercise, for the purpose of our training today, I'm going to go through a formula that we put together, hopefully that it would be able to assist sheriffs in proportioning the traveling. What we found in terms of complaints to the board, sheriffs don't proportion the traveling, and the very first document that they serve in the trip of 20 documents, example 20 documents for the day, they would charge the full kilometers traveled for the day for each and every document, which is obviously creating problems in terms of taxations and complaints against the sheriffs. And as a board, we want to assist sheriffs in overcoming this problem. The exercise that you see on screen, colleagues, I'm hoping that you can see the screen clearly. It's a very simple exercise, and we're going to go through it. You're most welcome to send Vincent now messages to ask or to clarify what I am going through on screen. But just bear with me. Chair, I must make mention that I've been training for so many years for the South African Board for Sheriffs, but training on sheriff's fees is the most difficult, because every sheriff out there applies the fees differently. And as you know, the fees are applied according to the instructions given by the attorneys. So in most cases, sheriff's returns would not match the other. And therefore, facilitating on sheriff's fees is really a difficult, a challenging one. And I know on this platform, we have a vast majority of sheriffs who are very knowledgeable and have much more experience than I do. But colleagues, bear with me. If we make errors in our presentation today, please bring it to our attention so that we have a document at the end of the day that is good for sheriffs to use in their offices. There are a number of officers all over the country who do not charge fees correctly, and at the end of the day, lose out in the turnovers. So especially in the traveling makes a very big part of a sheriff's office now in terms of turnover, in terms of income. So let's go through this. So for this purpose of this exercise, if you see on the top, I've noted the traveling fee as per the latest Gazette, which is 6 rands per kilometer. And I'm also noting the Gazette number, because very often in training, when students or sheriffs come to class and when they leave the training session and they try to apply what was taught to them or what was facilitated to them online or in class, they are unable to justify to an attorney, because the first thing an attorney would ask is, where did you get this fee or where did you get this rule? And we're quoting the Gazette number there, 43592, so that you are able to point this out to them. As the Gazette states, or the tariff states, that the sheriff is required to apportion his traveling amongst the number of documents that he serves on the same trip, from the office of the sheriff or the office of the court, whichever is closer to the first point of service. For the purposes of our exercise, colleagues, we're going to take, if you see on the top, I got the courthouse there, which is 25 kilometers, and the sheriff's office, which is 15 kilometers from the sheriff's office to the first point of service. So for our exercise, we are going to use the 15 kilometers, the sheriff's office as our starting point of service. Okay. And if you look at the number of documents, I wanted to make it as simple as possible so that people understand it. I didn't want to put in 20 documents there. I put in 5 documents on various kilometer radius so that you would understand. The first service the deputy sheriff would serve in this exercise is 15 kilometers away from the sheriff's office. Now, as you know, in terms of the tariff, both I and Matchport, the sheriff is allowed now to charge his traveling for the going and return trip. So in this case, your first service is at 15 kilometers from the office of the sheriff. The second service took place 20 kilometers further on from the 15 kilometers. Your third service took place 12 kilometers further on from the 20 kilometers. And your fourth service took place 18 kilometers further on from your 12 kilometers. And the fifth service took place at 40 kilometers away from the 18 kilometers. That is a scenario we're going to work with, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. The total distance traveled to the last point of service, in other words, at your end of 40 kilometers, was 105 kilometers, taking all 5 number of documents and adding up the total number of kilometers traveled on the single trip will give you 105 kilometers. The distance traveled back to the office is obviously 105 kilometers. So in other words, this deputy sheriff or sheriff would have traveled 210 kilometers to serve these 5 documents. Let's now look at the kilometer reading. As I said, the kilometers will, for the purpose of our exercise, we'll start at the sheriff's office, traveling at 6 rands per kilometer. And remember, which is a very important thing, is when you're charging your service fee, the radius traveled is still the same as in the past. So your 0 to 6 kilometers, your 6 to 12, and 12 to 20 radius must be applied to the service fee. We constantly get complaints that sheriffs are charging the straight 12 to 20 radius, even if the service address took place 0 to 6. Colleagues, be mindful of the fact that if you're traveling 0 to 6 kilometers, your radius, your service fee should be in line with the radius traveled. In other words, 0 to 6 kilometers, 6 to 12 kilometers, and 12 to 20 kilometers. Then you are entitled to charge your traveling over and above that. So in other words, if you're using 0 to 6 kilometers, you would use the service fee for 0 to 6 kilometers. We'll go through that later on. Over and above the 0 to 6 kilometers radius fee, service fee, you will charge for 6 kilometers times 6 rands. Okay. And obviously it applies the same for the 6 to 12 and the 12 to 20. It's very important to ensure that you do not use your maximum 12 to 20 or your 6 to 12 when the radius was 0 to 6, okay? Let's move on. As I mentioned, it's the 5 documents that we're going to use for the purposes of this exercise. The exercise might seem long, it might seem cumbersome to put together, but like anything else, practice makes perfect. And if you are committed to ensuring that you are charging fees in line with the Gazette, and obviously avoiding taxations and avoiding to be reported to the board for overcharging, and obviously being an act of misconduct in terms of the code of conduct, then you would obviously apply something like this. As I mentioned earlier on, if you have already a formula in your office which is working for you and it is much more simpler, then please, and as long as you can justify the formula and as long as you can justify your traveling cost, please go ahead. The first process I mentioned was 15 kilometers away from the sheriff's office. The return trip was 30 kilometers from the office of the sheriff. We will now implement the maximum service or execution fee, which is 12 to 20 kilometer radius plus the traveling. The reason for that, ladies and gentlemen, is because our first document is 15 kilometers away from the office. All right, so it attracts the 12 to 20 radius fee. At the first point of service, the distance traveled is 15 and return trip is 30. It must be apportioned amongst the 5 respective documents, remembering that traveling is always calculated on the going and return trip. The first service is 15 kilometers times 2 is 30 kilometers. You divide the 30 kilometers amongst the 5 documents that you have, which will give you 6 kilometers per document. Okay? The traveling distance of 6 kilometers is therefore allocated to the first process and each and every remaining process. In other words, your second, your third, your fourth, and your fifth. So each of your 5 documents will be 6 kilometers added to it. The total charge for the first process is 6 kilometers times 6 rands is 36 rands. So that is your traveling for your first process, 36 rands. Okay. Your second process that you have, you are traveling 20 kilometers further on from your first 15 kilometers. The return trip is 40 kilometers. Remember, our exercise starts at a point, and from the next point of service to the next point of service. It doesn't go back to the first point of service, if you're with me, okay? Wherever you stopped at the last point of service, you calculate from there. So in other words, from your 15 kilometers, you're going to now go to 20 kilometers. And the return trip on the 20 kilometers is 40 kilometers, right? And remember, you have 4 documents remaining to divide your traveling. So in other words, your remaining 4 processes, that is 40 kilometers divided by 4 is 10 kilometers, sorry. The remaining 6 kilometers have already debited to the process number 2. So you already got 6 kilometers debited to process number 2. An additional 10 kilometers will be debited, which should give you a total of 16 kilometers recorded for process number 2. So remember, as you go, you've got to add your kilometers traveled per radius, right? So your document process number 2 will be 6 kilometers plus 10 kilometers equals 16 kilometers. Times your 6 rands is 96 rands for process number 2. That is your process number 2 traveling fee. Process number 3, the same process will apply. You traveled from the last point of service, which is 20 kilometers, you traveled a further 12 kilometers to serve process number 3. If you round trip that, it will be 24 kilometers. In other words, the total distance must be apportioned among the remaining 3 documents, which is 24 kilometers divided by 3 is 8 kilometers. So process number 3 will attract 8 kilometers further on. Let's look at your process number 1, 2, and 3 now. Remember, the 6 kilometers and 10 kilometers respectively have already been debited to process number 3. An additional 8 kilometers will be debited to this document, which gives you a total of 24 kilometers. Now, the total charge for process number 3 will be 6 kilometers plus 10 kilometers plus 8 kilometers will give you 24 kilometers.
Because you turn from point A to point B.
Times 6 rands will be 144 rands. Mr. Nal, if you can just get the colleagues to mute themselves. Or if Chris can mute them. I see. Okay. The total process for number 3, the total traveling for number 3 will be 6 rands plus 10 rands plus 8 rands equals 24 kilometers traveled. Times your 6 rands will give you 144 rand traveling charge for process number 3. Process number 4, you have traveled 18 kilometers. The round trip is 36 kilometers, which distance must be apportioned between the remaining 2 processes. That is 36 divided by 2 is equals 18 kilometers. Remember, we have already debited process number 4 with 6 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 8 kilometers respectively. An additional 18 kilometers will be debited to process number 4, which gives you a total traveling for process number 4 is 42 kilometers. The total charge for process number 4 will be 6 kilometers plus 10 plus 8 plus 18 will give you 42 kilometers traveled for process number 4 times your 6 rands is 252 rands traveling for process number 4. Colleagues, I'm hoping you're understanding what I'm saying. I know it's a bit of a process, but as I said, over time, if you implement, and I'm sure most of us are serving within our jurisdictions for a number of years, and we get to understand the traveling distances from one point to the other. So implementing this process will not be difficult if you understand the traveling distances in your area already. Process number 5 is 40 kilometers from the last point of service. The return trip is 80 kilometers. Since this is the last process of service on this trip, the full kilometers traveled from the last point of service will be charged to this process. In other words, the total charge for process number 5 will be 6 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 8 kilometers, 18 kilometers, and 80 kilometers. The total traveling for process number 5 is 122 kilometers. Times that by 6 rands is 732 rands is your traveling. If you look at the table that I got on screen now, it gives you a better indication of what I've just explained to you. We've got there the allocation on the going trip was 30 kilometers for the first document, 40 kilometers for the second, 24 kilometers for the third, 36 kilometers, and 80 kilometers. Those are your 5 documents you traveled. Right? And as I explained to you, your first document attracted the 6 kilometers. Your second document attracted 6 plus 10 kilometers. Third document attracted 6 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 8 kilometers, which gives you a 24-kilometer radius at this traveling. And your fourth document attracted a traveling of 6 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 8 kilometers, and 18 kilometers, which gives you a total traveling of 42 kilometers. And similarly, on the last document, on 80 kilometers, 6 kilometers, 10, 8, 18, and 80, it gives you a total traveling on the trip is 122 kilometers. As I said, you multiply each one of them by 6 rands, and on the last column, you see a total cost. You have your first document, your traveling fee was 36 rands. Your second document, your traveling fee was 96 rands. And your third document, your traveling fee is 144 rands. Your fourth document is 252 rands. And your last document is 732 rands. Your total traveling fee to serve those documents will be 1,260 rands. Now, to verify whether the process is correct, if you look at the column that says total distance traveled, you'll see the total distance is 210 kilometers. If you go back to the screen on our first slide, I mentioned that the return trip, I'm just going to go down to the slide to show you. On this slide, you'll see our total kilometers traveled was 210 kilometers. That balances off with our table. On this slide here. On this slide, it shows you 210 kilometers traveled. That is how we verify whether our traveling distances are correctly proportioned. It must be noted, colleagues, that obviously many officers throughout the country would serve, or deputies would serve documents, more than 5 documents in the day trip, in order to ensure that we serve documents as fast as possible. Deputies are serving 25, 30 documents, or depending on which area you're serving, you would serve 5 documents in a rural area. Wherever you are, colleagues, it doesn't make a difference in terms of what you should be doing correctly in terms of charging correct traveling fees. So if you add more documents on the trip, the same process would apply in proportioning your traveling. So this is how you would proportion if you don't have a formula. I'm hoping that colleagues would be able to apply a formula similar to this or this one in order to ensure that we keep in line with the tariffs and charge correctly. Just for the purposes of ensuring that going away from this training, this document can be obtained from Mr. Nell for the purpose of you utilizing it in your offices for better understanding. Mr. Nell, I don't know whether there's any questions on this before I move on.
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Hopolo and Kumisi. Interesting one here. How do you calculate, because I'm reading the question, how do you calculate if you leave the last service point, let's say example 55 kilometers away from the office, and having to go back to the office to go and pick up another document. And then you have to obviously go back to that service area. Now, I'm asked, so why would you want to go back? But maybe there's an urgent document that needs to be collected whilst you are out there already 55, 50 Ks away from your office. Are you going to go back to the office to go and collect this document because it's an urgent prescription matter, for example? Now, where do you charge? Do you charge for that return trip? How would you charge that? Is that the question clear?
Yes, Mr. Nall, the question is clear. Look, I think, we're all practicing sheriffs and we all would apply our tariffs in accordance to what is being instructed. If an attorney, if a deputy is sitting 55 kilometers away from the office and he has no intention of returning to the office anytime soon, but the attorney insists that document must be served, And obviously the attorney will be informed that our deputy is out 55 kilometers, and for him to come back to the office now would attract a fee. And in my view, the attorney would have to pay for that traveling, because the deputy is already out on the road, and urgency fee means urgent instruction means that whatever we do, we have to stop to serve the document. I am of the view that the sheriff is entitled to charge the traveling, the full traveling, because that document is not part of the trip that the deputy is on. Unless, I must caution sheriffs, unless, we all have different processes in our offices, different rules for deputies, or different operational requirements in our offices. We have deputies coming in at lunchtime to pick up documents, or at a specific given time in the day that a deputy sheriff must report to the office to pick up documents. So I think, in all fairness to the process and to attorneys, if a deputy sheriff knows that his deputy will call at the office, just say during lunchtime, and the document is now sitting in the office at 12 o'clock, then he would obviously wait for the deputy to come and collect, unless the attorney insists he wants immediate attention. Then the attorney would have to pay for the full traveling costs. Thank you, Mr. Nell. Is there anything else, Mr. Nell?
No, sir, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Colleagues, we will now go through the guide for sheriff's fees charged in the High Court. I just want to point out some very important points for sheriffs to remember when charging fees. As you know, we are recently being scrutinized by the legal profession in regards to sheriff's fees, trying to keep sheriff's fees as low as possible. For many, many reasons. We all practicing sheriffs, we all know where attorneys want to be at in terms of paying sheriff's fees. But it's good for us as practicing sheriffs to understand Table C Part 2 and Rule 68 tariffs very well. And I constantly rely on the rules of the tariff that can guide me for fees charged that's not specified in the tariff. If you look at Rule 68(3)(a), it states that where any dispute arises as to the validity or amount of any fee or fees or charges, or where necessary work is done and necessary expenditure incurred for which there is no provision made, the matter shall be determined by the taxing officer of the court whose process is in question. Now, I rely on this rule very often, especially in the High Court, because, as you know, in the High Court, instructions differ and vary, and obviously might not be in accordance to the tariffs. In this round of the Gazette, the latest Gazette, the sheriffs have picked up a number of fees that's not mentioned in the tariff. If you compare the Gazette of the recent one to the older Gazettes, you would find a number of fees not there. It's something that the profession needs to look at. Now, an attorney would obviously, for an example, you've got a delicate court order to serve. It requires extra manpower. It requires extra time that you have to outlay. It requires something that you wouldn't do in the normal scope of serving that particular document. Now, sheriffs are very often afraid of charging a fee that's totally not in the Gazette. My view is that, colleagues, if you are justified in charging a fee, and you know that fee was justified and you did the work for that fee, then Rule 68(3)(a) allows you to charge a fee that is not in the Gazette but can be explained through taxation. Remember, the attorney can take you to taxation to explain that fee, and obviously within reason and justifiable. It's the rule states where necessary work is done and necessary expenditure incurred for which no provision is made. I would impress upon colleagues to look at Rule 68(3)(a) when you are stuck. And also Rule 68(3)(b) is a request to tax an account of a sheriff shall be 90 days after the date on which the account of which the sheriff's fees are disputed has been rendered. So remember, once you process your invoice, even if a sheriff pays you immediately, he still has the right to challenge you or ask you for taxation within the 90-day period. So paying your fee does not qualify that the sheriff is, at least the attorney, is not entitled for taxation. Remember that, okay?
Question, Mr.
Yeah.
Christopher Erasmus wants to know, what about cases where attempts are made? Do you charge traveling on attempted cases?
Yes, you will charge traveling for attempted cases. The traveling is applied to all documents. There's no limitation to the traveling. Is that okay, Mr. Nal?
Thank you.
Okay. I noted, colleagues, on a few points for sheriffs to remember, because these points, through experience, I found that it affects the operational structure of a sheriff's office, or it leads sheriffs into unnecessary difficult challenges. I say here under important notice, sheriff's fees must always be calculated in accordance to Rule 68 of the High Court Act 59 of 1959. So try and keep within the tariff as far as possible, so then you can justify, or your clerks will justify. Remember, as sheriffs, we have clerks in our offices, we have data capturers who merely processes documents for you. They are not totally, some of them or most of them are not totally in line with understanding the Gazette that the way a sheriff would go through the Gazette. They rely on the sheriff to impart this knowledge to them. So as Chair pointed out earlier on, the intention of this masterclass is to assist sheriffs implement the fees in a way that would increase the income. And obviously COVID-19 has inspired this masterclasses in the sense that we wanted sheriffs to look deep down in the practices to find fees. We also wanted sheriffs to understand that serving within your jurisdiction is the law. And we find that the board, a number of complaints reaching the board recently where sheriffs are serving outside the jurisdiction, and obviously causing conflict with colleagues on the ground. We're urging sheriffs to serve within the jurisdiction and to be mindful of your borders, so that you obviously maintain an amicable relationship with your colleagues on the ground, and obviously serve within the law. Section 3(1) of the Sheriffs Act states that a sheriff shall serve and execute documents, shall not serve and execute documents outside his jurisdiction. Such service will be null and void and has no effect in court. The only time a sheriff is permitted to serve and execute a document outside his jurisdiction is if he has been appointed for an ad hoc appointment. In other words, if a sitting sheriff has an interest in a particular matter, then the instructing party would obviously approach the court manager and request for an acting appointment. There is a detailed procedure as per the delegations of authority handed down by the minister to the courts that has to be followed in appointing an ad hoc sheriff. So we impress upon all our colleagues on the ground to ensure that when you are called to serve an ad hoc document, ensure that due process has been followed in order to make sure that the process is followed amicably and an amicable relationship is with your neighboring sheriff. We don't want you to encroach unnecessarily on other sheriff's areas. Okay. We know that attorneys are now trying to appoint ad hoc sheriffs just to avoid paying sheriff's fees. We will, at the board, we're very well aware of this. So we will impress upon sheriffs to ensure that when they are being appointed, to ascertain details of this appointment and the reasons. Okay.
Question, Mr. Megan.
Yes.
So if you're appointed as an ad hoc, where do you charge from? What is your point from which? Is it your own jurisdiction or the jurisdiction from and court where the ad hoc is?
Remember, an ad hoc is basically an inconvenient service for you. You're serving out of your area. So you will charge from your office or from the court, whichever is closer to that service address. You will not charge within that jurisdiction because it's an inconvenient service for you. You will charge from your office or the court or your court, whichever is closer to that service address. Okay. As I mentioned, any person who is of the opinion that the sheriff has overcharged can request that his bill be taxed. This must be done within 90 days. Colleagues, we urge sheriffs to be mindful of the fact that traveling must be proportioned amongst the number of documents that are being served on the same trip. Failure to adhere to this process could lead to a charge of misconduct and unnecessary taxations. Now, as you know, in the past, the iCourt Tariff Rule 68 did not carry a fee for urgent service. It's been a matter that has been challenged on various levels over the past number of years, where sheriffs applied at different tariffs depending on how they want to charge or what the inconvenience is. And as you know, in practice, the fees were obviously fees differed from one office to the other. With the introduction of the sheriff's urgency fee in the High Court, which is set at 235 rands, Rule 68(17)(a), the urgency means the same day or within 24 hours of the written instruction. So we impress upon colleagues to adhere to this urgent rate and obviously charge the prescribed fee. The tariffs also now specifies the after hours and what it means. The after hours means the time before 7 and after 1900 hours on Mondays to Fridays, or on a Saturday and Sunday or public holidays. That is your after hour description. I know that the tariff or the timelines given in the after hours might not be practical, because 1900 hours does seem a bit far out for after hours, but it's something that is gazetted, and until it is changed, we have to adhere to the prescribed tariff. Colleagues, as you know, in the tariff, the tariff does not have a prescribed fee for removals. Sheriffs all over the country apply different structures for removals, and obviously it varies from city to city, province to province. As a sheriff and as the training division of the board, we thought of the various factors that one would consider when determining a removal fee. We say here that when a sheriff is determining the cost for removal, the aspects that one would take into account in order to reach a fee is the labor cost that's involved, the number of laborers that he's going to use to carry out that removal, the diesel and the petrol, whichever is applicable to his vehicle, the cost of that, the deputy assistance if more than one deputy is used, the time taken to complete the removal, the quantity of goods to be removed, that will be determined from your inventory that your removal deputy is given, the type of goods removed. And this is very important, colleagues, because you might get on site and you might find that it's very heavy equipment, and you need, instead of 4 laborers, you might need 10 laborers. So that is very important to take into consideration. The value and type of goods will determine if you require special equipment or more labor. Also, the number of loads that you would make, in other words, the number of trips to and from that address to your warehouse. It is your responsibility to complete, we made a note here that it is your responsibility to complete the job in the most economic and cost-effective manner, so as to protect all parties. Remember, we are in times, and the economic situation in our country is affecting not only the sheriff's profession, but throughout the spectrum of our communities. So we must be mindful not to overcharge attorneys in terms of removals and evictions, and when we're determining removal fees, be mindful of the fact that at the end of the day, one of the parties, the plaintiff or defendant, is going to bear this cost. And obviously, we noted there that if a particular item that you are removing requires insurance cover immediately, then obviously that cover needs to be built into your cost as well, or taken into consideration when you are invoicing your removal costs. Okay.
Mr. Marian,
yes.
Can I disturb you?
Yes, sure.
Firstly, is it at all possible to just make the document slightly bigger?
Let's try.
Um,
Is that okay?
Maybe one more, I think.
One more go out of screen. Or is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. At the very same time, can we just take a question here from Rishad Singh? which court has jurisdiction for doing taxation? Is it the court that issued the document or the court nearest to the serving sheriff?
It's a point of contention at the moment. As you know, the amendment to the rules now says that the taxation must be done at the court that issued the document. It's something that is affecting sheriffs on the ground at the moment, because if I'm sitting in Durban and or Mr. Rishad Singh is sitting in his office in Tugela, his document is coming from Cape Town, that taxation will take place in Cape Town. Unfortunately, that is the amendment to the rules for taxation. So the taxation will take place in the court that issued the document. Unfortunately.
Another question when it comes to warrants and evictions. If it's an ad hoc, should you be, as a sheriff, is it good practice for you to notify the sitting sheriff in that area that you are serving these documents?
You know, it's very good practice to do that. As I mentioned on the outset, that attorneys are abusing the ad hoc process. As a practicing sheriff, I know that when there's a disputed fees, especially, or there's a dispute with the sheriff himself for some reason or the other, the attorney is trying to get an ad hoc appointment out of his jurisdiction. And unfortunately, the sitting sheriff even does not know that there's an ad hoc appointment in his area. The delegation of authority is very clear that the court manager must approach the South African Board for Sheriffs to ratify the appointment. He must inform the sitting sheriff and ask for an explanation or an approval, and he must inform the possible ad hoc appointee. That is the procedure in terms of the delegation of authority. And I think in order for us as colleagues, as sheriffs, to be fair to one another on the ground, we should speak to our colleague, the neighboring colleague, to see what is the problem. You would find that you could resolve a problem very easily in that way. I've done that recently. I was appointed an ad hoc sheriff recently, and I called my colleague and I addressed the matter with him, and the matter was resolved even before I could serve the document. So, you know, if us as colleagues want to maintain an amicable relationship within our colleagues in the profession, then obviously we would do the right thing and speak to the neighboring sheriff. It doesn't take away, or it's not illegal, basically, or it's not doing the attorney down, but a problem can be resolved.
Mr. Murugan, we have Paul van der Merwe, who says, in respect of traveling fees, and if you had 20 cases, if you were to travel in a circle formation, leaving the office and going clockwise, consider case 20, the last case, is served on your return trip. You're almost back at your office. So case 20 will then have a cost of 19 other cases added to it. Yet it is only 6 kilometers from your office. Surely taxation would then happen. How would you deal with that?
A difficult one.
Yes, tricky one.
In other words, your last process and your first process is your first process of service.
Yeah.
So colleagues, you know, there has to be a starting point and an end point to your service, unfortunately. If you started at point A with your first document, and unfortunately, if you know, I can't see how it might be a very rare case that one would travel in a round circle in that manner. A very rare situation. In general, practice would dictate that when a sheriff or deputy sheriff is allocating work for the day, he would start at a point and end at a point. He wouldn't set his work to go on a round trip, or it depends on the area you're serving, or it depends on the amount of documents you have. But I think it's something that would require that particular sheriff to apply his mind to the traveling or setting of the work in the correct manner. I, as a sheriff, would not set my work if I know it's going to end up back at the office. I would set the closer documents on the next trip. To avoid, in terms of our example that we have, it would mean that last document would attract 19 other costs, which is unfair to the document. So I would reschedule my documents for service to start on the opposite direction the next day if required. That's the best solution I could give at this point in time.
Magda Moorcraft says, if I plan the trip with 5 magistrates court cases and 1 high court urgent service, and they are all 210 Ks from my office, can I charge the high court on its own?
No, you can't. The tariffs is now same in the I and the match court. So an I court document will track the same traveling as a match court document. In the past, your I court document was different. With the amendments, in the past 2 amendments to the tariffs, your I court document is equal to your match court document when it comes to traveling.
So she also says, it goes on to say, if I have an urgent high court case to serve 80 kilometers from the office, how do I calculate traveling? 50 times 2 times 6 times 2?
I didn't get you there. I didn't get you there.
So if I have a high court, Magda wants to know if she has a high court case to serve, urgent high court, 80 Ks from the office. So how would she calculate that?
If it's a single document, urgent document, 80 Ks from the office, if that is a specific document that the deputy is going to travel on, then it'll be the full traveling. If the attorney requires to go specifically for that one document, if it's a high court or match court, as I mentioned, it's irrelevant whether it's a high court or match court document. If it is a specific document on an urgent trip that the deputy sheriff has to travel, sheriff or deputy sheriff has to travel, then it would attract the full traveling.
Okay, Mr. Regan, I must just warn you, time.
Yes, I think if there's any further traveling questions, let's get colleagues to post it to you away from this away from this session, because it's going to hold us back now.
Okay, they can certainly, please do add the questions to the chat so that it will be recorded. Thank you.
Okay, another important point, I want to stress to sheriffs that the guide that we're presenting today is merely a guide. The onus is on you, the sheriff, to familiarize yourself with the tariffs and charge accordingly. We have put this guide together with the best of our knowledge and thought of every fee that a sheriff would attract per return. I want to make upfront note that when we go down to the guide now, you will see that I've included telephone calls, emails, urgency fee on all the returns. This does not mean that you have to charge telephone calls, emails, and urgency fee for every return. It is just there to ensure that you think about these fees when you carry out your functions. So please do not charge these fees if you did not carry out that or you did not attract that fee. In other words, if you didn't receive an email, don't go and charge email and say the board for sheriffs had it on its guide, so we have to charge it. Remember that, okay? And the reason I looked at emails and telephone calls is when chair discussed this matter with us, how do we increase, or how do we get sheriffs to ensure that they're receiving the most out of the fees? And when you look at the trend of today, most of us are doing more emails. Emails are becoming a very big part of our business, and telephone calls, which we don't really record. You get a telephone call querying a case number in the day, the document is out to the deputy. We take the call, we forget about the call. We are entitled, colleagues, to record that call and charge a fee when the document comes back to the office. And that is why you look at every return that I got here now. I recorded telephone and emails received and sent, or letters. How often do we write letters to attorneys? Even to serve a summons today, you get a letter from an attorney. You are entitled to charge a fee to receive that letter and read and implement what they say, or the changing the instructions. So you're entitled to that fee. You're receiving an email, you're entitled to that email fee. So I put those very simple descriptions in all returns so that we don't forget about it. And I know in practice we forget about it, okay? Especially our data capturers. For the purposes of this guide here now, in terms of the Rule 68, service of summonses, petitions, together with notice of motion or set downs and other notices, orders or other documents. The service fee, the new service fee in terms of the new tariffs, registrations is 11 rands, returns 42 rands 50, the service fee is 70 rand 51. I've got the additional or separate documents. Very often we get a separate document that's now attorneys are conveniently attaching to a summons. For example, section 129 notice. It's not part of a summons, it's a separate document. We are entitled to charge that 11 rands for the additional document. Then I've noted the urgency fee and the traveling at 6 rands a kilometer, which you will obviously have to determine. The telephone calls, the new tariff is 16 rands plus the prescribed trunk charges. So you need now to determine what the cost of that call was in order to charge the exact telephone call. The 16 rands is merely the telephone attendance. Your prescribed charges would be added to the telephone attendance. I must make mention that when perusing the gazettes between the Magistrates Court and the High Court, for some reason, the Rules Board has made the High Court telephone calls 16 rands, but the Magistrates Court is 18 rands. So just make note of that, okay? Cell phone calls is not prescribed in the tariff, but we obviously will charge, and I just left it as telephone calls with the prescribed charge. Fax received, the new fee is 6 rand 50 as well as fax sent. Letters written is 19 rands per letter. Remember, you're entitled to charge a letter written even if you're sending an email. Email sent and received, a very contentious point at the moment. As you know, and I mentioned earlier on, attorneys are engaging sheriffs more on emails today. So it's becoming a very big part of our officers. I'm urging sheriffs to keep very close to the tariffs or charge the tariffs accordingly and avoid overcharging. Something that needs to be taken into consideration, and I'm hoping that board management is online here, would take note of this email received and sent fee. The email sent is 6 rand 50, but the sheriff is entitled to charge the prescribed trunk charges added to this email. And remember, the tariff specifically states that the 6 rand 50 is per page, not for the entire email. Now we're picking up situations where attorneys query and say, but hang on, I sent you a 30-page email, you must charge me 6 rand 50. It is not correct. You are entitled to 6 rand 50 per page, plus your telephone costs. Email received in the same situation. Your postal cost is obviously as per the prescribed rates by the post office. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go to the non-service because it's the same fees across, except for the fact that the non-services attempted fee is 52.50. Okay, in the High Court. I'm going to go to the next slide, which is executions. Execution of warrant of execution and court orders. Yeah, as well, I was really scared to implement fees, and I thought of as much of the fees that would be attracted to serve a warrant of execution. But as you know, colleagues, court orders attract different fees because the instructions vary as per the court directive instructions.
Mr. Morrigan, sorry to disturb you. Just excuse me. I'm being a bit laxed on the questions here. So can we just do one or two?
Yes, sure. As long as it's not difficult.
Khomotso says, how do we charge for data in instances where deputies have to search for a location of the service address on Google?
I'm sure it's an odd requirement. As you know, there's no prescribed tariff for that in the Gazette. So it would be an odd situation. And I, for one, if I am a sheriff, was excessively using that facility in my office where attorneys require you to do that. And by the way, I just noticed that recently attorneys are sending you Google Maps and you have to find the address, which to me is not in line with the rules, because the rules say that the address must be furnished on the document before issuing. But if a sheriff is in a situation where he or she is required to use data extensively to locate addresses, then as a sheriff, I would implement Rule 68(3)(a), where I'm charging a fee that is not gazetted to justify why I'm charging the fee. And if taken for taxation, I have to have an explanation for that. But in terms of the tariffs, there is no fee for that.
Okay, thank you. V. Miso, does a sheriff tariff, a non-service tariff apply when a document is stayed on the instruction of the attorneys without attempt to serve?
No, it does not. If it has no attempt whatsoever, if there was no attempt at all, if the document came into your office and the attorney, before it goes out for service, the attorney requires the document to be returned, you cannot charge a non-service fee. There is a prescribed fee for that, and I think it is 11 rands to return the document before service.
Then another question from Richard, something that you and I discussed this morning before we started. Is the R6.50 for emails sent and received charged per page?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Mr. Now. Can I move on?
Well, there's are annexes to the main document. Additional
Which
documents.
annexes?
If you get annexes to a document, annexes to the main document.
Yes.
Hopolo Mkumisi wants to know additional documents, probably meaning are they additional charges to those for those annexes, or what do you only charge for the printing of the main document?
I would charge for the annexes as well, because you are going to print every page out of that email. So you're entitled to the fee if you are printing that email in total. Rule 6814 states that sending and receiving of each and every facsimile electronic mail per page. So it's quite clear in the Gazette. Let's move on. Registration in terms of execution, we are now. Registration is 11 rands, and as I mentioned, return is 42.50. Execution, the new execution fee is 88 rands. The urgency fee is 235, and obviously the traveling. The attachment is 172.50. The notice of attachment is 18 rands, and if you had to serve further copies, in other words, there's more defendants cited, or more than one defendant cited, or there's occupiers on the property, you will charge 11 rands per notice of attachment on the remaining or on the further occupiers or defendants. And then you obviously will have the withdrawal fee. The withdrawal fee is very specific, which is 3% of the value of the property attached, or of the writ, whichever is lower. We must be mindful, colleagues, that we cannot charge the full 517 rands for your withdrawal fee. You must charge 3% of the value of the property attached. In other words, your deputy sheriff's inventory will dictate how you charge your withdrawing fee. Okay? As I mentioned, I'm not going to go through the telephone calls and faxes and emails again, but I just put in there your removal costs. Obviously, your removal costs will be determined through the calculation of our introduction in the front of this front slide. Then obviously you'll attract towing costs and locksmith charges if you had to use a locksmith or if you had to tow a vehicle. Those costs will obviously be determined by the service provider you appoint. And remember, colleagues, that invoice you would invoice the actual cost that you incurred from the locksmith or the towing costing bill given to you by the service provider. You're not entitled to go and increase that bill in any way. Withdrawing of movement, yes.
Sorry, can you just clarify for Bronwyn Villiers? She's saying that many attorneys query the charge per page on emails, as the rule refers to faxes and not emails. Is that correct?
No, the rule refers to electronic mail as well. I just mentioned the rule number now. The rule number is Rule 6814, which says sending and receiving of each necessary facsimile or electronic mail per page, in brackets, in addition to telephone charges. That is a rule 6814. If the colleague wants to refer the attorney to it. But as I mentioned, colleagues, it's a very contentious point at the moment. There are lots of challenges by attorneys because And I think it's an unfair situation, something that the profession needs to look at, because attorneys now are conveniently emailing, especially the iCourt documents in vast numbers. I mean, you've got documents coming in 40, 50 pages to the sheriff's office, and you're getting 3 of those documents in the day emailed to you, and you now trying to run the administration of an attorney's office within your establishment, where you have to download these emails, print it, collate the document, and enter your deputy to serve. I think it's something that the profession as a whole and the South African Board for Sheriffs must look into, and obviously try and find a way to get a better fee out of this. Because a very, very important aspect that comes to mind when I look at my situation in my office is that the maintenance of your photocopying machine is a very huge cost. And what concerns me more is something that we don't even think about, is the amount of use of that scanner in that photocopying machine. It's a very expensive item in a photocopying machine, and when you scan excessively, especially with the volumes that attorneys are giving us now, it really impacts on the lifespan of that photocopying machine. So it's something that the profession as a whole needs to look at and obviously determine fees. But unfortunately, colleagues, we have to be guided by the tariffs as prescribed for now. Okay. I mentioned here that in this slide, warrant of execution, where you withdraw an attachment, it's the same fees as service, registration, return, the execution, and the withdrawing fee. I've got a fee there, colleagues, which says keeping possession. It's a very controversial fee. I know my learned colleagues in the past queried this fee extensively in one of our training sessions. But it's a fee that is in the Gazette. It's in the iCourt Gazette, keeping possession, where it says that if an attachment is pending and there's no officer left on the property to take care of the assets, a fee of 4 rands per day can be charged. Now, as you know, in the iCourt, your attachment does not lapse. It's only withdrawn when an attorney requests the withdrawal. You can be sitting with iCourt files for years and years on end, and those files lie in your cupboard. And attorneys close their files and don't inform the sheriff to close his file. It's something that needs to be interpreted. It's something that discussions must take place, and obviously find a way as to how we implement this fee correctly. I've got in the next slide, payment on warrant on presentation. This is when a deputy sheriff is on the road, he's collecting fees, he's collecting the judgment debt, and he is now required to calculate fees. Very often we get deputy sheriffs stuck. They don't know what fees to charge, but obviously depending on your administration in your office, and obviously if you've got office managers or supervisors or control clerks, you will guide the deputy sheriff. But the intention here is to show you as sheriffs on the ground that you need to look at every fee that was incurred in handling that specific document. Your collection commission fee has been gazetted at 9% of the judgment debt to a maximum of 691 rands 50 and a minimum of 71 rands. That is your collection commission. Remember, when you're calculating writ paid on presentation or withdrawing attachment, if sometimes the deputy sheriff would walk into the premises and he's already completed the inventory, he's already served the writ, you are entitled to charge for that inventory and you're entitled to charge for the writ, the notice of attachment. So those two fees must be added to these to that structure when you're calculating fees for payment for warrant of presentation. Okay. So similar, the next slide is the same thing. I want to look at the removal for sale, which is the slide next door, staying of sale before removal. Now, I found that as a practicing sheriff, we incur a lot of time, or we spend a lot of time when it comes to movable property and immovable property. Our clerks are constantly on the telephone taking queries from attorneys, receiving letters, receiving emails, and we don't have a process similar to the legal profession. If you go to an attorney's office, when he deals with the file, he's got a note on his file where they record every time they speak to the sheriff, every time they speak to the client, every time they incur a cost for that particular file. And we as sheriffs must try and get into this habit of recording what we do per file. That would create fees in our offices. Very often you find the clerks will pick up the phone, talk to the attorney, but do not record the telephone call. So the idea of this presentation is to get you to train your clerks to record fees constantly. Letters written, we need them to do that as well. Here as well, we got the fixing sales notices. I must state that the fixing sales notices, there is no fee in the High Court tariff. Peruse the tariff, there is no fee for fixing sales notices, but the tariff in the Magistrates Court is $25.50. I'm not saying sheriffs must charge the same tariff, but I noted the tariff there so that just as a guide for sheriffs when they're charging, because we are carrying out the function. We are fixing the sales notices in the notice board of the court and at your offices. Okay, the removal costs I've mentioned earlier on, the manner you calculate. Storage as well is becoming a very controversial point amongst attorneys and amongst legal profession and sheriffs. We obviously cannot dictate to you your storage cost per day or per item. You need to determine, and the tariff is very clear, ladies, colleagues, for removal and storage. The tariff states that you need to investigate within your jurisdiction from similar service providers as a guide. So in other words, if you've got a storage company in your area, you can check with them what is their daily rate, or for removals, your removal companies within your area in various sizes of removal companies. You know, you get big removal companies who move big items, and then you get the small guys who carry furniture around. Try and investigate from these guys what are their costs, and obviously base your cost as close to or equivalent to theirs, so that when you go for a taxation, you can obviously justify your fees. Remember, taxation requires you to justify your fees. So when you go to taxation, you must be able to justify to the taxing master that this is why I charged what I charged. Okay. Remember, the attorney would try and keep you as low as possible. So you need to go with proper stats from your area.
Mr. Murigan?
Yes, sir.
Rochelle Ithazen. She says, just to be sure, if I receive a document of 20 pages by email, I can then charge for the email together with R6.50 per page, and then I can also charge R5 per page for the copies, which is made in order to serve the given document. Or is the charge for the copies included in the email fee?
No, she's entitled to the copy fee to photocopy that document.
Okay, then Adrian Cubido wants to know the fee guideline from the banks are out of date. So when will the new fees structure come out for removals?
Look, I don't sit on the banking forum. I don't represent the board on the banking forum. It's a different committee that does that. I will not be able to answer the question at this point in time, but I know on the ground sheriffs are discussing this matter, and I think whichever organization the colleague is part of, I would recommend that he speaks to his organization to see where they are with this process. As you know, the voluntary organizations are part of the banking forum. So I would leave it to them to try and find assistance from there. I wouldn't want to confirm on behalf of the board where the process is, because I'm not part of the committee.
Another question, does stay removal charges apply when the sheriff is at the property attempting to remove, or can it be included when the instructions are received without attempting to execute?
I'm trying to understand your question. You say when the deputy is already on site attempting to remove.
Yes.
and is requested to stay the
Does the
removal.
stay removal charges apply?
Yes, he's entitled to charge because he's already actioned the removal instruction. He's obviously already there, he's with his labor, is attending to the removal. And if he's stopped on site from removing, then yes, he's entitled to the attempted removal charge. Let's move on to sale held. The sale held. This is when a sale is concluded, and obviously you're charging your commission. These are the fees that you would charge as usual. Your 11 rands, 42 rands, 50 for the return, your execution fee, your fixing sales notices, letters, your storage fees, your removal, your commission, your bank charges to bank the sale money. You're entitled to that, and obviously it'll be the rates that the bank has. The current rates that the bank would charge. I've got the drafting of interpleader summons applications in terms of Uniform Rule 68. As you know, Rule 68, High Court rules did not have a fee, prescribed fee for interpleaders. Now it does. With this new gazette, the drafting of Rule 58 application is 104 rands and 50 cents. That is the drafting of the interpleader fee. As a practicing sheriff, I know that fee is not justifiable because you do a lot of work in the interpleader summons, and something that we need to look at going forward as well. The balance of the fees in drafting of interpleader summons is your general fees into your telephone calls, your letters written, and copies made. You're obviously receiving your affidavits, communicating with the client, and obviously lodging those interpreters in court. You're entitled to charge for your traveling. Moving down the slide, warrant of execution, immovable property. Now, colleagues, this section here is where our data capturers, our clerks need to pay very careful attention, because the volume of instructions or the volume of communication increases in these departments if you are a sheriff who's handling a lot of immovable property. Your first service, also I must note, the way we designed this guide, we designed it in such a way that when you're trying to use or trying to teach your staff in your office, you would find that we followed each step of the process. In other words, the slides prior to this one, you would find that I started with the execution, it went to paid on presentation, and then it went to attempted removal or removal, then it went to a sales stage. So that could assist sheriffs who don't have a system. As we all know that many of us have proper systems, good sound systems in our offices, but many of us on the other end don't have any system. So if you don't have a system in your office, this guide will be able to assist you to ensure that your staff follows a process. You could find, if you take this guide, you might find, hang on, I never used to do this return in my office. I never used to charge for this process in my office. We tried as far as possible to bring in as many returns in this guide, so that when you're trying to implement and teach it in your office for your staff, you would be able to get the maximum out of these fees. I started the immovable property, as you know, the attachment and service of the attachment on the Register of Deeds. That is your first point of process in your immovable property. Here as well, the registration fee is 11 rands, your return is 42.50, your execution is 88 rands, your attachment of the fixed property is 208 rands. Remember, this fee includes the service on the Register of Deeds. Your notice of attachment is 19 rands, and copies, depending on the number of copies made, it will be 5 rands per copy. Your letters written, you write a lot of letters in immovable property. You're writing to the Register of Deeds, you're writing to the defendant, you're writing to the occupier. You charge per letter 19 rands. Your emails received and sent obviously is there as well. Your registered post letters, registered post obviously is determined by the prescribed tariff at the post office. Then you're obviously serving your defendant and occupier. The same fees would apply: registration, return, execution. You're traveling to the defendant, your notice of attachment on the defendant. If the defendant and occupier is one and the same person, then obviously it's one notice served. If the defendant and occupier is two different people, then obviously you would serve the occupier separately as well, which is a fee of 6 rands 50 per occupier. If obviously you got more occupiers, more than one occupier on the property, you get some properties that's leased in sections or different compartments or different buildings on the same property, so you would charge 6 rands 50 to serve each occupier. Then you're serving on SARS and the bondholders.
Yes. Heinrich Bukes would like to know, with regard to a warrant of delivery, can we insist on an open indemnity from attorneys before removal?
I wouldn't say you can insist on open indemnity because it does not make provisions for it. I know in situations now where you're getting gated premises and where defendants are obstructive when you're removing vehicles and you want to be protected in that way. I wouldn't say you can request it up front, but obviously if you know the situation is going to be bad, then obviously you would communicate with the attorney. But it's something that an individual sheriff would have to apply his mind to. And you know, the indemnity issue is a very contentious issue as well, because remember the attorney is indemnifying you with an open indemnity, which means any damage that comes, he has to suffer the cost. So he's going to be very cautious in just issuing out an indemnity. He would rather wait to see what is the actual problem on hand before he's issuing an indemnity. And in most cases, in practice now, you'll get a tracing agent confirming the danger or the possible obstruction from the defendant, and they would support the sheriff in getting the indemnity. So it is per matter and per situation, I would say.
Thank you, Mr. Milligan. Just to let you know that we're already 10 minutes over our booked time, and we have permission to go until 12 sharp. We have to complete in 20 minutes.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm going to go through this very quickly. We're still on the ICOT, we still got the match court to do, but I can go through it very quickly. Colleagues, service on SARS, bondholder, as I said, it is the same fees there. Your notice of attachment is the important part. You're fixing sales notices on the fixing at the court and notice board and your offices. The only different fee there is your fixing sales notices, which is 44 rands plus your traveling. Improvements done, remember, improvements must be done by the sheriff. An attorney cannot tell you that I've got an improvements that we obtained 20 years back. You're entitled, in terms of the amendment to the Rule 46, you're entitled to do the improvements before you obviously follow the process. The conditions of sale, you must serve now the conditions of sale on the debtor, on the defendant, so you must obviously carry that process out. Staying of sale, the next slide, staying of sale before conditions of sale received. Obviously, that is the fee. The only fee different from the other slides is the perusing of your conveyance certificate, right? Staying of sale after conditions of sale is received. Obviously, this is a lot of work that went in. Your staying fee is 208 rands, and your next slide up there, your fax sent obviously is the same. Perusing conveyance certificate 104 rands 50. Remember, some of us obtain the conveyance certificate on behalf of the attorneys. So obviously you will charge whatever the conveyancer has charged you over and above. Perusing, considering conditions of sale. The next three fees, colleagues, is new fees, or two of them are new fees in the Gazette. And sheriffs must be mindful of these fees because it actually creates an income for you. Perusing, considering conditions of sale is 104 and 50. A new fee that they included now is considering further amendments to the conditions of sale. So in other words, you're entitled to now, if there's errors on your condition of sale, you're entitled to charge the attorney 104 and 50 for that. And then you will charge him a further fee for settling the conditions of sale, which is 104 and 50. So as you can see, to settle those conditions of sale from the time you receive, you're entitled to charge fees for the errors that they make. Considering the notice of sale, verifying the notice of sale, and the advert is 104 and 50. It's an all-inclusive fee as per the Gazette, okay? Then your Cpa attendance. As you know, the requirement is you must register your buyers and carry out that whole administrative process. The fee now is 315 rands, right? Considering proof of preference creditor, this fee 46.5A is 11 rands. In other words, when the attorney sends you a return to say that I've served the local municipality or I serve the judgment creditors, you're entitled to a fee of 11 rands to peruse that document and keep it on file. Okay. Withdrawing of attachment, it's the same thing, the same fees. The only different fee there is your withdrawal fee, which is 208 rands. Sale held, as I mentioned above, it carries all the fees. You're perusing conveyance certificate, considering conditions of sale, your notice of sale 104 rands, amending settling conditions of sale. The only different fee there is basically nothing besides your commission, I think. Yes, your commission. Obviously, if you sold this property to the bank, you would charge your commission in this return as well. If you have sold this property to a private purchaser, colleagues, you need to do a return for that commission. We want to impress upon sheriffs that that commission earned has to go into your system. So you need to prepare a return separately for the commission for the private buyer. Giving transfer, even here as well, there's fees that's coming now in the new gazette that sheriffs must be mindful of. Giving transfer is 25 rands. Receipt of certificate in terms rule 4614A. This is your old certificate of balance. Now it's called certificate of payments and monies received, which is 19 rands. Preparing your plan of distribution is 104 rands 50. Giving notice to all the parties that lodge writs with you is 19 rands. Those are the new fees that has been included. Colleagues, the placing purchase on terms, the new fee is 52.50, and the 4611 report is 52 rands 50. And the new a new fee that has been added to this section is informing the debtor of the cancellation, which is 19 rands over and above your service fee. As you can see, there's a lot of fees that came into, especially immovable property, that colleagues need to be aware of. A chamber book application is the general fees that you would implement. Let's move on to the magistrates court. I'm hoping that I can do as much as possible here. Colleagues, Rule 34.2a is obviously the requirement to have your account taxed and vouched for before payment. The rule that I like is Rule 34.2b, which was not part of the Gazette before, Table C Part 2. They have aligned this rule to the High Court tariff, which states where any dispute arises as to the validity or amount of any fees charged, or where necessary work has been done and necessary expenditure incurred, for which no provision is made, the matter shall be determined by the office of the court, taxing office of the court, whose process is in question. Now you can see the rule clearly states of the office of the court whose process is in question. So in other words, where the court issued this document. Just to justify the explanation to the question that was raised earlier on. Okay. Yeah, as well, colleague, keep that rule in mind when you are stuck and charged a fee that's not in the tariff, where you can justify the fee. Point 1, 2, 3, and 4 is similar to the High Court that I've explained earlier on, that you need to take into account when considering your fees. Same thing here as well, your urgent removal. You would notice the urgency fee is same as the High Court now in the Magistrates Court. Your after hours fee is the same as well. Yeah, as well, I want to caution colleagues that although I put email and telephone calls on every return here, you do not have to charge if you didn't incur the cost, okay? Very quickly, as you know, the Magistrates Court tariffs is dictated by the radius 0 to 6, 6 to 12, and 12 to 20. Service of summonses, notice, letters, and court orders. Here as well, your service fee is now, the registration is 11 rands, same as the High Court. Your return fee is 17 rands 50, and your service fee is 44 rands. Your non-service fee on the right-hand column is 37 rands 50. I'm not going to discuss the emails and telephone calls now. If you had a separate document attached to the summons, you will charge an additional 11 rands for the document. Okay? Your 6 to 12 is similar. The only change of the fee is 52 rands for service fee for a 6 to 12 radius, and your non-service is 44 rands. Okay, the rest of the fees are the same. If you incur them, your 12 to 20 as well, your service fee is 71 rands now. Your attempted service fee is 63 rands. Okay? Warrant of arrest and attending. I put this on as a separate item just to show sheriffs because there's a lot of fees that we can make here. Your execution fee is 63 rands for 0 to 6. Your attempted execution is 52 rands. Arrest attending, you're entitled to charge 37 rands 50 per journey traveled, over and above your traveling kilometers traveled, and 71 rands per hour or part thereof for attending court. In other words, while you're sitting in court, you're entitled to charge the fee. The same slide, which I just wanted to show you the execution, 71 rands for 6 to 12 and 63 rands for attempted service. Here as well, same thing. Your 88 rands for 12 to 20 and 78 rands 50 for attempted service. Then you got your warrant of execution, interdicts, garnish orders, emoluments, attachment orders. Your execution fee, the new fee for 0 to 6 is 63 rands. Your attempted execution is 52 rands. Your inventory fee is 37 rands 50 per half hour. Your notice of attachment is now 11 rands, and obviously 5 rands per copy if you had to make copies. Your withdrawing attachment, maximum fee is 208 rands, but remember you will charge 2.3% of the value of the goods attached. In other words, whatever your deputy has valued the attached goods, you will charge 2.3% of that value. If the value is lower than 208 rands, then you will charge that figure. If it increases, if it's more than 208 rands, then you will charge the maximum fee of 208 rands.
Question, Mr. Murugan.
Yes.
From Homotso. What fee is applicable when the sale of immovable property is not confirmed by the court?
If you, with the new situation, I'm assuming Komotso is referring to the new situation where there's a reserve price and the sheriff did not obtain the, did not meet the reserve price. If that is the question, then there is a specific fee in the Gazette now, which says that if a sale is taken place and is not confirmed, a fee of 208 rands is charged.
Magda would like to know what fees will she charge to go and collect a document urgently at a attorney's office?
A very specific question to a very specific situation. It is determined by that sheriff himself. Remember, we are not obligated to collect documents from the attorney's office. The rules are very clear in that the attorney must get the document to the sheriff's office. But if that sheriff is willing to do what is requested by the attorney as a favor or as just maintaining a good relationship with the attorney, then it's determined by that sheriff. There is no fee that I can tell she must charge. The rule for Komotso's question is the reserve price not met. The fee is 208 rands 50 as gazetted now. Let's move on. Your withdrawing attachment is done. Warrants, interdicts, garnish orders 6 to 12. Here as well, it's the same fee. Your withdrawing attachment is the same, but the execution fee is 71 rands and your attempted is 63 rands. Okay. 12 to 20 is the same, but the execution fee is 88 rands and your attempted service is 78 rands 50. Withdrawing of movable attachment. You have the withdrawing fee there, as I mentioned earlier on, 2.3% of the value of the goods attached, subject to a maximum of 208 rands. Okay. Payment on warrant of execution in the magistrates court. Obviously, your execution fee will determine on the radius where you went. In other words, if you are 0 to 6, you will charge 63 rand, 6 to 12, 71 rand, or 88 rands for 12 to 20. It's very important for the deputy sheriff or sheriff to ensure that the correct execution fee is being charged. Remember, attorneys are even querying if you're charging 50 cents more on your return now. That is how bad the situation is out there. So try and keep to your tariffs. When you're collecting money on presentation, you will collect 9% of the judgment debt, 691 rand maximum and 70 rands 50 cents, which be a minimum cost. Okay, then you're obviously entitled to bank charges. Staying sale for removal, the only different fee there will be the perusing your adverts, which is 11 rands. In other words, work done before the removal is stayed. Staying sale is 208 rands. Obviously, you're serving the defendant with whatever documents, a notice of sale, and you will charge obviously your service fees for that. Copies made if you had. In other words, whatever work you have carried out, as I mentioned in the High Court, whatever work you carried out in the file, you will charge those fees. Moving on. Sale held, as mentioned earlier on, your commission is the only difference. Your storage fees and your removal fee is where you will bring in all those costs. Unfortunately, a draft of interpreter summons. Here as well, there's a prescribed fee now for drafting of interpreter summons, which is 104 rands, 50 cents. And obviously your execution fee will determine where you went and served the interpreter summons, the distance you went in terms of your radius. Your immovable property, as colleagues are aware that the immovable property now is aligned to the High Court. So whatever fees you're charging in the High Court, you will charge here in the magistrates court now. And obviously the rules are also aligned to each other. So the obligations are very similar to each other now. I got obviously the first point of service is your register of deeds, which is 208 rands, your execution 63 rands, and your notice of attachment 9 rands, together with all the disbursements that you incurred in relation to telephone, letters, and faxes. Then you're serving your bond, your defendant occupier, local authority. Those are the fees that you charge, your notice of attachment, your service fee on the relevant parties. Then you're serving the bondholders, SARS, receiver of revenue, to determine if the defendant is a VAT vendor. A simple fee of 19 rands to serve the notice and your execution fee, together with your postage costs. Sales notices are fixed. The fees for fixing your sale notices plus your traveling cost. Improvements done, the magistrates court also now determines your removal, at least your improvements to be done by the sheriff. So must be accurate, and obviously the fees is 52.50 per half hour. Staying of sale before conditions of sale is received, whatever work has done in terms of disbursements, and obviously your staying sale fee is 208 rands. Staying sale of condition after conditions of sale, you notice I elaborated on staying sale before conditions of sale and staying sale after conditions of sale. The reason I've done that intentionally just to make sheriffs aware that there are a lot of fees that we need to look at, even up to a stage where the attorney just calls you and says, stay the sale. You gave me a sale date, but stay the sale because we're not proceeding for some reason. You incurred a lot of work, you've done a lot of work, and you receive conveyance certificates, so you're entitled to that. I just wanted to show sheriffs the type of fees that you can charge. And obviously, after you receive conditions of sale, notice of sale, this requires, this will entail a lot of fees. Similar to the High Court, you're staying sale 208 rands, you're perusing conveyance certificate, considering the incorrect word I put there, it's actually considering conditions, not perusing conditions, is 104 rands 50. Considering further amendments is 104 rands 50. Settling the conditions is 104 rands 50. And considering the notice of sale is 104 rands 50. As you can see, colleagues, the fees are aligned to the High Court. Makes it much easier for us to operate. Then attendance of the CPA, same as the High Court, is 315 rands. Proof from the preference creditor in terms of Rule 43.5 is 11 rands. Little fees of 19 rands and 11 rands is very important to build our returns. Withdrawing of attachment with the register of deeds is 208 rands, and obviously whatever other costs that you incurred.
Mr. Murican, can you raise a question?
Yeah, sure.
Zavira Abdi, she would like to know if you've done the actual sale for fixed property and you have called for bids, but no bids received at the reserve. And your sale is no bid, no sale. Am I correct that you can only charge 208 rand and 50 and additional attendances with respect to transaction?
When you say additional attendance of transaction, are you referring to the CPA process?
I can only assume that that's what she's meaning.
If yes, it will be all the relevant fees as you look at sale completed on my slide on screen now. It says sale completed. It would include all that fees because you are now on the floor ready to sell, or you started to auction and you're not getting a bid. So it's a sale completed by the sheriff. You will charge all the fees on screen now, together with a fee of 208 rands 50.
Mr. Murigan, are you close to completing?
Yes, I'm nearly there. I just want to go to 2 more slides, then I'll be done. Then giving transfer is similar fee. Giving transfer is 25 rands. Receipt of your certificate of balance, if you don't call it, the old word says certificate of balance. The new words are receipt of monies and monies paid and received, which is 19 rand 50. Preparing plan of distribution, 104 rands 50. Giving notice to all parties who lodge writs, 19 rands. And then obviously here as well, I want to impress upon sheriffs that if you sold a property and your buyer is a private purchaser, not a bank, then you are required to do a return for the commission earned, so that your fees go through the system. Placing purchaser on terms, execution 63 rands, 71 rands, and 80 rands, depending on the radius that you're traveling. And obviously your notice to the purchaser is 5250, Rule 4311 5250. Chamber book is the same fee. Mr. Nell, I've reached the end of my presentation. Before I hand over to you, I want to thank all colleagues for attending the training session. If I've made any mistakes in the presentation, please forgive me. I know I have a wealth of experience sitting on this line, and I want to thank the board, especially the chairperson of the board and the training division of the board for giving me this opportunity to present and facilitate this training guide. Remember, this training material or the guide is not exhaustive. There are fees, as I mentioned upfront, that could be added to the tables that I presented to you. You are most welcome to send any further suggestions to Mr. Nell's department, and obviously we will look into enhancing and obviously producing a much more improved guide. On that note, I want to thank colleagues for attending and the board for giving me the opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Nell.
Mr. Murigan, just the last question. I'm not sure I understand this, but are there specific fees for Anton Puller execution?
No, there are no specific fees for Anton Puller execution. I mentioned upfront that on specific court orders, you would do things differently. Now, an Anton Puller order requires the sheriff to take extra and further actions. That the order determines what the sheriff would do. The order would dictate to the sheriff what actions he needs to take. So it would attract fees that's not gazetted. It would attract time engaged, because when you do an Anton Puller order, you use a lot of time searching for data on computers, searching for documents, specific documents. Remember, the Anton Puller order is a very specific order, and it requires you to pay careful attention to detail. So you would obviously charge for what you have done, as long as you can justify the fees that you are charging. And if taken to taxation, you can use Rule 68(3)A and B to justify the fees. The Anton Puller order is a very specific order. There is no fees, but remember, the tariffs carry fees for time engaged. The tariff carries fees for making inventory. The tariff carries fee for instructions of that nature. So it all depends how you bill. In other words, whether you're billing correctly for the right amount of time you spent, for the number of hours that you used to carry out the Anton Puller order, or the work that you do with the data or the service providers, the software service providers, or any specialized action that you have to carry out. That is very specific, and it will depend on the individual sheriff on the amount of work that he does on an Anton Puller order.
Thank you, Mr. Murigan. So just finally, there were some questions, Yaku, I haven't seen for years, up there in the Northern Cape. He would like to know, so these slides, are we going to will the board make them available to sheriffs? I know we discussed this earlier. What, from the board's point of view, knowing the experience we've had from attorneys previously, what would you recommend we do with these slides? Can we share them with the participants, or rather to all sheriffs? Do we put them on the website?
Mr. Nell, I would prefer taking this document back to committee and obviously analyzing the questions that was raised. Maybe we'll pick up certain points that was brought to our attention that I might have missed out. Let's reevaluate the document, make additions, make changes to the document if it needs be. As I said, the document is not exhaustive. We can make changes to it. At the end of the day, I would like to see a guide that is properly designed for the sheriffs. And as you know, in the past, we had a similar guide like this on the website, which unfortunately carried removal fees through investigations, and that created a bit of tension on the ground. We don't want to mislead any sheriff's office by attorneys using this guide against them. But I can assure you that the guide is 100% in line with the tariffs. So let's go back to our committee, to the training division, and to the board, and obviously ensure that the document is foolproof and taking into account the suggestions made through this chat. And then we will obviously let the profession know how we will distribute. The best possible way to do it is through the website. So we will obviously engage sheriffs on it. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Mulligan. And for all participants, just to let you know that, yes, the full recording of this particular presentation will be, there will be a link on our website that you can access. Hopefully, Chris and Ash, the technical team that's providing us this platform, will be able to sort that out for us by Friday this week. But it will be done shortly. From the team at the South African Board for Sheriffs, from the office, we thank everybody for participating. It went very well from our side. We thank you, and please be watch out. There's an alert for tomorrow. We're going to be sending you for the 27th of November. You'll get your next invitation tomorrow. So please register as early as possible. That is a program with the software providers. There are 5 software providers that's going to be doing presentations. Schultz and Ray and Ditz, so Harmsa. So there are various people, and you'd want to be able to participate on that platform as well. Mr. Mulligan, please stay on, and thank you very much to all the participants.